The samurai were an elite class of warriors that existed in Japan between 1200 AD to the 1870s. They were a social class comprised of the most well-respected and feared families within Japan. They followed a strict code of ethics called Bushido, trained from childhood in the sword and bow and valued honor above all else. Many claim they were the best warriors to ever exist. Famous warriors like Miyamoto Musashi have made their philosophy and way of life famous, and popular culture has helped spread their ideals to the world. But what were they really like? And what happened to them? Well, the Japan in the early feudal period was a very different place. Japan, as a country, went few serious reform in the 7th century, which they modeled on the empires of China. This included taxes, military reforms, and forced most farmers to work for their lords. Very similar to the European feudal system, this made a lot of lords extremely rich, but also created enemies and resentment. To protect their vast wealth, the lords of Japan hired the very first warriors. These were an early rendition of the samurai we know and love today. In fact, they barely used swords back then, mainly preferring the bow and arrow. They remained this way until the 9th century. During this time, the emperors lacked any real power, and Japan was thrown into a massive civil war. This wasn't the first and wouldn't be the last of its kind. Rural Japan was torn apart, and the emperor's power only existed in the capital of Kyoto. The warriors that were once hired to protect the lords soon filled this power vacuum, becoming the lords themselves. After decades of war and fighting, the samurai established a military government known as the shogunate. This was the beginning of the samurai era. Many samurai clans fought for the title of shogun, supreme military ruler of Japan. They still had an emperor above them who was viewed as more god than man, but the shogun had all the real power. Japan continued this way until an external threat appeared. Kublai Khan, the Mongol emperor of Yuan China, invaded Japan. This forced Japan to reunite and fend off the invaders. Thankfully, a typhoon destroyed the majority of the Mongol ships, so the samurai managed to defend Japan from becoming a part of the Mongol Empire. That typhoon majorly impacted the course of history. Anyway, the emperor couldn't afford to pay the shogun and samurai who helped, so they overthrew him, making the shogun the sole ruler of Japan. This battle between shogun and emperor would be a reoccurring theme throughout Japan's medieval history. The shogun and emperor were both unstable and struggled to unite Japan, which led to lords called daimyos ruling over individual provinces. This kind of helped Japan's stability, but the daimyos were doing their own thing and most of them ignored direct orders from the shogun. Tension between emperor, the shogun, and daimyo would build until it eventually exploded in the 1500s. Japan entered all-out civil war in the age known as Sengoku Jidai. This was the height of the samurai era, with many wars being fought, and was also the time that Miyamoto Musashi, the greatest samurai of all time, lived. After many decades of fighting, the Tokugawa clan managed to defeat the rebellious daimyos and bring back order. They said enough is enough and forced all samurai to either serve a lord directly within the cities or give up their swords and farm. This really was the beginning of the end for the samurai. It transformed a class of warriors to docile bureaucrats. Fighting became much more rare and even frowned upon. The final nail in the coffin came in 1868, where the Meiji Revolution completely did away with the samurai and adopted a more Western system. Although samurai armies were using guns for centuries at this point, they finally did away with swords completely, and the few remaining samurai either became police officers or public officials. In 1877, a group of angry ex-samurai united and tried one last attempt to bring back the way of life and customs that made them samurai. They attacked the government. This was known as the Satsuma Rebellion. They were truly the last samurai. They would be defeated at the final battle of Shiroyama, and the age of samurai was officially over.